I'll start with the financial side of things, but then maybe I should play into the politics a bit more.
Sure.
In the 1970s, so we were building a pretty substantial welfare state through the mid-20th century. In the 40s, we had Tommy Douglas form the first socialist government in North America with the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation in Saskatchewan. They created a number of crown corporations, that's what we call a nationalized enterprise, as well as gradually creating the first single-payer health insurance system. By 1970, that had gone national. So we were kind of clipping at the heels of a social democratic Scandinavian-style country at that time. From 1969 to 84, Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current prime minister, was the prime minister for almost the entire time. And he expanded the welfare state, but ran a deficit almost every year. And this confused a lot of people. There were debates over whether it was good that the welfare state was expanding or bad that it was coming with these deficits. And to confuse matters further, his first finance minister initially proposed that this be totally costed by taxes on the rich. The rich then formed a capital strike, or threatened a capital strike. So there was class warfare fought by the capitalists. That tax reform was put into, it was sent away. It sounds like I'm going back, it sounds like it's like very removed from what's happening now, but it sets up this cascade effect. Because what happens next is that finance minister disappears. Then a new finance minister comes in called John Turner, who went on to be prime minister for about 6 months. He was known as a business liberal. And a part of what happened next was the deficits were run in part to alleviate the taxes on the rich. So this confuses the whole spectrum. What you get is people not sure if this is left-wing, right-wing, or center. And their answer to that is going to depend on whether they liked it or not and who they're identifying as the bad guys. And that's true to this day. What happens after that is neoclassical economics comes in full swing, as everybody sort of knows, and that was Milton Friedman and then Reagan and Thatcher and all of that. And you get this cascade of governments after that, one after another, claiming that they're going to clean up the debt of the previous government and handle inflation. So in the 80s, the conservatives come in and they make that claim. They have some very, very big elections, form some of the biggest governments in all of Canadian history. But then they get the debts of the George H.W. Bush, it's the economy stupid recession, right? So they lose all credibility on that issue. And they also put through regressive tax systems on sales taxes. And they put through, they signed NAFTA. They were nowhere near as far to the right as Reagan and Thatcher, but they took a corner of that and were a part of this general kind of neoliberal influence in Canada that was another step away from the trajectory we were on in the mid-20th century. When they get into the 1990s, they get completely decimated. And they stay decimated until the early 2000s. But when they're replaced, it's not with a left-wing alternative. The Liberals come back, but this time the Liberals are saying they're going to clean up the debts of the Conservative Party. How do they do that? Cuts. And one of the things that they do especially is go after housing and basically stop any kind of cooperative housing in Canada, as well as other forms of social housing. They get back to balanced budgets, brag about it like crazy. You're familiar with this story around the world, the Clinton consensus, the end of history, Tony Blair in Great Britain, this sense of a not so right-wing version of neoliberalism being the grand success story, but then things get rocky in the early 2000s. Then comes in Harper, and how Harper comes about is very important as well, but I'll skip that for now. But it has relevance to our present moment. Harper gets in through the first past the post electoral system. He holds power for about a decade. We get more big deficits through the Great Recession, the financial crisis of 2008. But he's bragging that they're much lower than in other countries, and he's moving back towards a balanced budget faster than other countries. And he even tried to sort of cook the books to make it look like he had gotten there towards the end of his term. He was really about 6 billion shy, but and I hope I'm not going too fast for folks.
No.
Cool. So then finally comes in Justin Trudeau. And Trudeau says he's willing to deficit spend. But this time, by the time Justin Trudeau comes along and says he's willing to deficit spend, we're well into a neoliberal status quo. We're very far removed from the trajectory that we were in the mid-20th century. Now, meanwhile, all of the time that these governments were talking about, oh, we're going to get rid of debt, we're dealing with the debt, we're the party of fiscal responsibility, and having this competition for who's the party of fiscal responsibility and economic growth, what's actually happening? Is any of that debt actually being gotten rid of? No, of course not. Every dime of it was turned into household debt. It was all just put onto credit cards, student loans, car loans, and mortgages. So that whole time, what was happening was housing was gradually getting more expensive. School was getting a lot more expensive. The manufacturing jobs were declining. The unions were weakening. The tax system was becoming less progressive, more regressive, and the entire political spectrum across Canada was narrowing and shifting to the right, narrowing and shifting to the right, narrowing and shifting to the right. So that's how we get to where we are now. To give a snapshot of where we are economically, in 1980, household debt per $1 of disposable income for the average Canadian citizen was 66 cents. It is now $1.85 of household debt for every $1 of disposable income in the country. And total household debt in Canada is 107% of total GDP in the country. So what we have seen is Canada, step by step, it's not just the current moment. This has been building for decades, but we have become a rentier economy. We're extremely unequal. We're accelerating the rate at which we are unequal at a record high level. So we're very capitalist in the sense of a division of workers and owners, but it's actually not industrial capitalism. Our investment in the means of production is actually pretty low. It's real estate and financialization. And the chances of that being fixed right now are very, and I should mention, this is like, I would like to get into what the politics are fighting within this context, but this is the context regardless of who's in power. So like the system right now, we still have a pretty high standard of living in Canada, but it has stagnated intergenerationally, it has declined. And the prospects moving forward are that either we will steadily decline from here, slowly, or there could be the kind of collapse that you saw in the United States in 2007, 2008. But that's true regardless of who is in power. This is a rentier capitalist state that has really taken over Canada in a major, major way. It is, and over 100 of our members of parliament, so our parliament is made up of 338 members, over a third of them are invested as landlords or in real estate investment trusts. So our politicians are profiting off of this housing crisis. That includes about 50% of the Conservative members of Parliament, about a third, or actually a little more than a third, of the Liberal members of Parliament. But even the NDP, they're much better. That's the New Democratic Party, historically our Social Democratic Party, now more vaguely of a progressive party. But they have about 16 to 20% of their members of Parliament invested in real estate investment trusts and in landlording. And the Green Party has 2 seats in the House of Commons. One of them is invested, so they're batting 50% as well. So nobody has their hands clean on this issue, which means that it is really hard for people to have any kind of faith that any of this could be dealt with, or to even see a path through the electoral system that this could be dealt with. So that was a lot, but I hope that was that fairly clear. Did that kind of
yeah. Okay.